everyone, it's Emma, and today I'm doing what month is it? I'm doing my November wrap-up because it's December, which I should know because it's Christmas time, but whatever. I read 6 books this month, which at first I thought this was a bad reading month for me, but when I looked back over it, this was a good reading month because one, I read a couple books that were really long. I really enjoyed all the books that I read this month, which is more important than reading the biggest number of books, right? Although I didn't read as many books as I normally do, it was still a great reading month, and I'm really excited to talk about some of the books that I read and what I thought about them. The first thing that I read this month is one that a couple people have asked me about, and that is Milk and Honey by Ruby Carr. I hope that's how you say her name. This is a collection of poetry. It is very popular right now. It's been all over the place, so I figured I would pick it up. There was so much hype about this collection of poems that I think it fell short of all the hype. So although this is beautiful poetry, and the way that this author... Well, let me explain. What this author did is her first language, which I actually forget what the language is. If you remember, remind me down below. The way that they write in that language, the grammar style, is without punctuation and without capitalization. She decided to write in that grammatical style, but write it in English. So there's no capitals and there's no punctuation, and it makes for a really interesting, unique kind of style. And throughout the book, there are illustrations, which are really kind of fun and emotional, but they're very simplistic. So I did enjoy that. Although this poetry is beautiful and I really enjoyed the illustration style, I think that this book was so hyped up that it just fell short for me, and it was just one of those things where it didn't hit the mark. After that, I read This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. This was definitely one of my favorite books that I read this month. I loved this book. I have only read one of her other books, and it was one of her adult books. I read Vicious. I did not enjoy it very much. I'm not even sure if I finished it because my brother read it also, and I think I just had him fill me in on what happened in the end. Not that I hated it that much, it's just, it was a little too disturbing to me. Something about it just hit me the wrong way, and I'm not usually like that. I'm not usually easily disturbed. So I was interested to try one of Victoria Schwab's YA books. This one sounded so interesting, especially around Halloween time, and I didn't get to it in October, so I read it this month. This Savage Song is the first book in the Monsters of Verity, probably duology trilogy. It's an urban fantasy book, and in this world, monsters are physically created from acts of violence. There are 3 levels of monsters, and they correlate to the level of violence that the act is. So the first level is violent assaults, the second is murders, and the third, mass acts of violence, like mass shootings. Those acts of violence literally, physically create monsters. In the front of this book, there's a little thing that says, "Plenty of humans are monstrous, and plenty of monsters know how to play at being human. V.A. Vale." That is basically the theme of this book, and it's what I really liked about it because we follow 2 characters. There's Kate, who is the daughter of this crime lord of part of the city. He is a human. She is a human. The author just explores that idea of, does being a monster intrinsically make you bad? Does being human intrinsically not make you monstrous? And I really enjoyed that about it. I loved Kate. She was such a punk in the beginning. Basically, it starts off and her father had shipped her off to boarding school. She'd been to lots of different boarding schools. One of them was even like an all-boys school, and at each one she managed to get herself expelled because she wanted to go back to her home, to the city. She was such an anti-hero, and I loved that because I feel like we don't get as many female anti-heroes as we do male anti-heroes. And then the other character that we follow is August, and he is a monster. And not only that, he is a Sunai, which is supposed to be like the most dangerous type of monster. He's the type of monster that comes from the massive acts of violence. He's such a cinnamon roll. I absolutely loved him. Like, he was just so cute and sweet, which is just hilarious because he's the monster and she's the human and she's the anti-hero, and he's like this little sweet ball of sunshine that I love. Another thing that I really liked is the author continually avoided cliches. There was absolutely no romance in this book. Like, you assume, oh, it's about a boy and it's about a girl. They're gonna get together and, like, monster and human romance thing. But that didn't happen at all. There's literally no romance. I don't know if it'll go there in the later books, but it seemed like Victoria Schwab was actively trying to avoid any cliches because you would get to this point where you felt like it was going to go down that road where you would expect it to go in like a typical YA fashion, and then she would just like swerve the other way, and I absolutely loved that about it. One of the best things about this book is just the world building. The way that the monsters actually, their nature correlates to the act of violence that they came from. It's so interesting, in the idea that your actions and your hatred have literal consequences is really interesting. I cannot wait for the second book. Like, I have a feeling these books are going to become favorites, and I'm so happy that I loved it because I really was a little bit baffled by the fact that I didn't enjoy Vicious. The next book that I read in the month of November was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I loved this book. Jane Eyre is a very well-known classic. I had never read anything by the Bronte sisters, but I kind of went into this book knowing that I would really enjoy it because I love classic Gothic novels, and I grew up watching like all the different Jane Eyre movies, so I knew the storyline, and I was right. I absolutely loved it. The writing was great. There were so many lines that like I wanted to copy down into my notebook, and Jane is so much fun to read about. I wasn't expecting to love Jane as much as I did. She's so tenacious, and she's kind of quiet, thoughtful, which makes her easier to relate to, but yet she has this sharp wit. She would make all of these observations about people in her internal dialogue that just had me cracking up because she was so brutally honest in her thoughts. So just a little short summary of this because I hate when people don't give summaries of classics. Jane is an orphan girl, and she lived with her aunt and cousins for first 10 years of her life, and we start the novel and she goes off to school pretty quickly, and we follow her life all the way up until she is in adulthood. The main thing about this book is that she becomes a governess for this little girl, and the little girl's guardian is Mr. Rochester, and there's a romance, and it's very complicated and creepy. It definitely has that Gothic feeling that, yeah, it's definitely going to be one of my favorite classics now. The next book that I read is Heartless by Marissa Meyer. I did make a full review for this, so I will link that down below if you want to hear more about my thoughts. So I'm just going to give a quick summary here. Marissa Meyer also wrote the Lunar Chronicles, which I have not read, but I plan to. In this book, we follow Kath, who is the daughter of a Marquess, and so she's nobility, and her parents have certain expectations for her life, and in fact, she's being pursued by the king. That is not what Kath wants for her life. She wants to open a bakery. If she ever gets married, she wants it to be for love. She's sweet, if not naive, and so it's very interesting to watch her go from that girl into the Queen of Hearts, and that's kind of what we follow in this story. The thing that really interested me about it, we know what the Queen of Hearts is like, so the whole book you're kind of expecting what's going to happen that's going to turn this girl into the Queen of Hearts, because she might have a little bit of a temper, but she's pretty sweet and she doesn't seem like she could turn into the Queen of Hearts. So the whole time you feel this like something is coming, something is going to break her heart, or some twist is going to happen to turn this girl into the Queen of Hearts, and that was a really interesting feeling to have throughout the whole book. Overall, I'm really happy that I read it. I really liked the Mad Hatter's character because it's like early young Mad Hatter. We follow him before he was the Mad Hatter, and so that's really interesting. I loved seeing some characters that we know from the original Wonderland stories show up. I also loved the addition of Jest, who is the main love interest. He was very lovable and charming and witty and smart. And then the first book that I read for the Tome Topper Readathon was The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. These have been on my shelf for a while, and it's another book that I kind of knew I would like going into it just from hearing people talk about it, like people who like the same books as me also love this series. I've heard wonderful things about Brandon Sanderson, so I was really excited to get into it, and it did not disappoint. I absolutely loved it. I wanted to go right into the next book, but I couldn't because I had other things to read. So hopefully in the new year I will get right to the second one because I really loved this world. This is one of Brandon Sanderson's adult fantasy worlds. It's the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. These books are really long. I'm like all over the place today. I'm sorry, guys. We mostly follow two main characters. The first one is Kelsier, who is like a middle-aged man. He's somewhat of a legend to the people. And then we also follow Vin, who is a 16-year-old street thief. I'd seen a lot of people who weren't drawn into their characters, but I really loved them. I loved Vin's whole struggles. She grew up with no family who loved her, no one who like really took care of her, so she doesn't trust anyone at all, and it was great to see her kind of work through all of that. I also really enjoyed the magical system. It was really interesting and not difficult to understand at all. Usually I get into these big fat fantasy books and just for the first 100 pages I'm lost, but I didn't experience that at all with this book. I felt like I jumped right in and just understood it right away. In this world, magic is used by burning metals. So they don't explain exactly what burning means, but basically you ingest metal, and different types of metal equal different types of powers. So there are mistings who only have one type of power. They can only ingest one type of metal and burn that metal, and then they can, like, either they're super strong or all of their senses are enhanced. But then there are mistborns, and mistborns can burn all of the metals. So they're very powerful. I just loved the writing style. I thought it was really fun to read, even though these books seem daunting and it takes longer to read than, say, a 300-page book. It wasn't difficult to read. It wasn't dense. I felt like it was really easy to read. If I hadn't been so busy, I probably would have flown through it. But as it is, I think it took me like a week. I think I'm going to write a Goodreads review, but I haven't gotten there yet. So once I do that, I will link it down below so that you can check that out, because I don't think I'm going to do a video review unless people request it. The last book that I read in November is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is another one that I've been really wanting to read for a long time, but it's long and it's a little daunting, so I just wasn't sure about it, and I finally picked it up for the Tome Topper Readathon, and I really enjoyed it. I was nervous that I would have the same reaction that I did with Milk and Honey, because this book is so hyped and I've seen it all over the place. Just, it seems like everyone is reading this right now. It lived up to the hype. This book is about these students in college who they kind of study like a classical education under this one professor, and he exposes them to a certain way of thinking, but they take it too far and it turns very dark. Right in the beginning of the book, they tell you that they murder one of their friends. And so you're following that story. It's written as if from Richard, the main character's point of view, in the future. So he knows what's happened and he's going back and writing it. This book reminded me so much of F. Scott Fitzgerald's novels, and I'm a huge F. Scott Fitzgerald fan. So this was like a modern F. Scott Fitzgerald novel. In the beginning, it's not dark, but they maybe party too much, or they drink too much, or they're not very moral characters. And then as it goes, it just spirals down and down and down until it becomes something completely different. The other thing that I really liked, it's almost as if the author split the novel into two parts. I mean, it is split into different parts, but the first part of the novel seems to portray what is good about these characters. And I think that's because it's from Richard's point of view, and he has the tendency to be blind to the negative things about people's character. So in the beginning, you really start to love these characters, and then halfway through, something happens and you start to be scared of them. They take this dark turn and you start to be focused more on the bad and like their fatal flaws. One of my favorite characters was Henry, and in the beginning I just loved Henry. I thought he was so loyal to his friends and like took care of them, and he did a lot to help Richard. And then halfway through I started to realize how proud he was and what a downfall that was to him. It was really interesting to watch like all of these 5 friends. In the beginning you just have one view of them, and then it changes drastically to the end. It will definitely give you many feelings, because I still have an emotional book hangover. It was just intense, and I feel like it's one of those books that I need some light, fluffy, happy fantasy books to recover from it, but I loved it and I would definitely recommend it to people. That's it for this wrap-up video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit the subscribe button. I am Miss Emma Reads a Lot on all my social media, which I will link down below as always. I'm not sure if I'm going to put up my next video on Wednesday or Friday this week, because I'm kind of doing like 2 videos one week, 3 the next, but some weeks I'm doing Monday and then Friday, and some I'm doing Monday and Wednesday, and then every other week I'm doing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I'm not sure if you guys will see me on Wednesday or Friday, but thanks for watching, and I will see you guys soon with a new video.